There we go. All right. So, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our second LIRT coffee hour featuring our lovely guest speaker, Jane Hammons. Jane will be discussing small teaching and information literacy instruction, a talk based on the research and findings presented in James Lang's Small Teaching, Everyday Lessons from the Science of Learning. In Small Teaching, James Lang uses research on how we learn to provide guidance for small changes that instructors can make in order to support student learning. This presentation will provide an overview of the small teaching approach and explore how librarians can use this approach to help students develop key understandings and skills related to research and information literacy. Our speaker, Jane Hammons, is an associate professor and the head of teaching and learning in the Ohio State University Libraries, after previously serving as instructional services librarian at Northern Kentucky University. Jane was the winner of the 2025 ALA Library Instruction Roundtable Librarian Recognition Award, and she has published her research in journals such as the Journal of Academic Librarianship, the Journal of Information Literacy, and College and Research Libraries. So, welcome, Jane. Thank you so much for joining us, and take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I'm super excited to give this talk today. So I'm going to put a link in the chat. If folks want to access my slides, feel free to do so. And we'll go ahead and jump in. Some folks may know I give a lot of workshops and webinars, and I always like to start by just checking in and seeing how everyone is feeling. So we have some options up here on the screen. So we have a grumpy goat, a cheerful chicken, a hungry horse, a drowsy donkey, or a curious cow. So if you feel comfortable sharing, you can either unmute and shout it out if you would like, or add it into the chat. Which one of these matches how you're feeling? And please feel free to propose others if you would like. And if you're not comfortable doing so, that's okay too. Let's see, we've got a curious cow, a couple of drowsy donkeys, curious cow, drowsy. So it seems like we're alternating basically between curious and drowsy, which I know it's like a Friday. I know, like, totally understand that for sure. Grumpy goat, curious, hungry horse. Yeah, awesome. Cheerful chicken, wonderful. Yeah. All right, great to hear. Great to hear how everyone is feeling today. So you already heard the introduction. One thing I wanted to mention, as you heard, I previously was at Northern Kentucky University, and then before that, I was at the University of Pikeville in southeastern Kentucky. So I was involved in KLA for many years. I've been to many KLA conferences and events. So I'm super excited to be able to come back to my roots a little bit and meet with you all and talk about this with members of KLA. That was super exciting to get that invitation to come back. If you would like to email me, please feel free to do so. You can hammons.73@osu.edu. Happy to talk more about anything that we are talking about today. And I did want to mention, some folks may know, some folks may not. I help to coordinate a teaching information literacy certificate program that we offer through the Ohio State University Libraries. Any librarian, library worker, or instructor from across the country can enroll in this program to earn the certificate. So if you're interested in that, please feel free to go ahead and enroll. We'd love to have you as part of that program. And I also wanted to mention, a few years ago, so small teaching has been an incredible influence on my teaching career, my teaching practices, and I became so interested in it that a few years ago I published an article looking at connections between small teaching and the framework for information literacy. So if you're interested in that article, that was published in College and Research Libraries a few years ago, and please feel free to check that out as well. That will kind of expand on some of the things that I'm going to talk about today. What I'm planning to do is, as you heard, provide an overview of the small teaching approach and what that looks like, and then we'll think about and explore how we can use the small teaching approach supporting student learning related to information literacy. So I have a lot of slides here. We may not get through all of them, so that's why I wanted to share the slides. I do hope that we can have some discussion and chat for our library coffee chat today. So if we don't get to everything, please remember that everything is on the slides in case we don't get to it. So I wanted to start by just giving a quick check-in and seeing how familiar everyone is with the notion of small teaching. So if you've heard of it before, or if you haven't, if you just wanted to put in the chat like, yes, I'm familiar, no, I'm not, sort of in between, wherever you stand, if you're comfortable sharing what your familiarity level is. All right, so not yet, not at all, not either, not familiar, not a bit. Wonderful. That's great. Have heard the term, but not sure what it is. A little bit familiar. Excellent. Yeah, so seems like most folks are not really familiar with it, which is totally wonderful. I think hopefully you'll all find this very helpful. As I said, it's been probably the most important book on teaching that I have read in my career, and the impact that it's had on me. So hopefully it will be valuable for you all as well. All right. So as we jump into the content, I have a question for you all. Again, you can feel free to share your response in the chat, or you can feel free to unmute if you would like. So my question is, why do you think that asking students to make predictions about something they are going to learn may increase their ability to learn it? So just any thoughts that you might have on this question. One of the strategies in small teaching is to encourage students to make predictions about what they're going to learn. So I wanted to see if you all had any thoughts on why you think it might be that asking students to make predictions could increase their ability to learn something. So we have, they pay more attention. They're already thinking critically about the topic. Maybe it would help them to anticipate what to expect a little bit, right? Subvert their expectations, creates a kind of cliffhanger for them. Yeah, great responses. All of those are fantastic responses. All right, so we'll come back to this in just a second. So give a quick overview of what small teaching is. Or the small teaching approach. So as you heard, this is based on a book by James Lang called Small Teaching Everyday Lessons from the Science of Learning. So this book is not about information literacy at all. And I don't think he even mentions the word information literacy anywhere in there. It really is more just a general approach to pedagogy and teaching based on research into how we learn. Right. So the basic premise of small teaching is that we can improve our students' learning by making small changes to how we design our courses, how we engage with students in the classroom, the activities that we do with our students in our classroom, and how we communicate with our students. So James Lang really focuses on thinking about what are brief learning interventions that we can do. What are activities or engagements that we can have with students that may take only 5 to 10 minutes, but that can support their learning? Or if you're thinking about, some of you may be teaching a full semester course, what is a one-time change that you can make in a full semester course, or that you can make to a course design or to an assignment design, or how you communicate with students that could be supportive of increased learning. All of these are intended to require minimal preparation, minimal grading, things that you can incorporate, in a one-shot session or in a full semester course. Depending on how much time you have with the students and what your goals are for that session or that course or that learning experience with students. So Lang breaks his recommendations or strategies into 3 different big categories and then kind of breaks them down into smaller areas of focus. So knowledge, understanding, and inspiration. And I'm going to try to go through as many of these as possible to kind of get some examples and ideas of the types of strategies or approaches that are recommended in the book. So earlier, I asked you to think about why it might be helpful to have students make predictions about what they're going to learn. And this is really the first approach or strategy that Lang recommends, is that whatever we can do where we ask students to engage with the material before we've taught them anything, to make predictions about what they are going to learn, or to struggle in some way, or attempt to do something before we've actually taught them how to do it or engage it, that there's evidence that this can provide a foundation for deeper learning, having students make predictions. So as you all guessed, there are several different reasons why this might be important to students. And I think your guesses were right online, right? So first of all, it can help to reveal to students something that they don't know, right? If we ask them to do something right away and they struggle with it, and later on, then we try to teach it, they remember that they didn't know how to do that before. Right. They can help students sort of, activate that prior knowledge that they have. If we ask them to do something, they'll have to think about, what do I already know that would allow me to do this, or that would allow me to provide an answer or make a guess. Right. So they have to kind of rely on what they already know and start making connections to that existing knowledge. And then, as some folks indicated as well, it increases your emotional investment. Like, it's a cliffhanger for them. We all want to know what happens. We want to know if our guess was right, right? And so we're going to pay attention to that. And then when that comes up later in the lesson, we can remember, hey, my instructor asked me about that. Maybe I should pay attention to this. If this is now the second time they've mentioned this, or the third time they've mentioned this, right? So those are all some of the reasons why asking students to make predictions could be really helpful in supporting their learning. So there's a many different ways that you can do this. You could ask students, they come in, they sit down. Today, we're going to be talking about this topic. List 3 or 5 things that you already know about this topic, or give them a short pre-test. Have them complete poll questions during a class session. If you're trying to do something, or you want them to make a guess, what will happen if I do this, or if I say this, or what do you think happens next in this situation? And then you can also do closing questions, especially if you're having students come back for an additional session, or you're teaching a full semester class. Here's what we talked about today. We're going to be talking about this next week. What do you think this might be that we're going to be talking about, right? So again, just getting them engaged, having them make those kinds of guesses or engage with the material before we've had a chance to actually teach it. One thing that I'll note, that it's important to provide feedback as quickly as possible, because we know that if someone makes a guess that is wrong, or they try something and they take the wrong approach to it, sometimes if they're not corrected fairly quickly, that can be what they remember, the wrong thing that they did. So it is important to provide that feedback, so we're not just kind of leaving them hanging, like asking them to predict something at the beginning of class and then never telling them what the actual answer was. All right. So I wanted to open it up for a little bit of discussion with you all, thinking about a typical information literacy instruction session that you might teach, whatever that might look like. Can you think of anything, an example that you could use where you could ask students to make a prediction about something, or to engage with the material in some way before you gave them any instruction? So I'd love to hear. Again, you can unmute, raise your hand, add it to the chat. Any examples that folks can think of?
Personally, I work a lot with our history students, and finding primary sources is something we focus on quite a bit. So particularly in the earlier classes, like their 200 levels, one thing I thought about was asking them, where do you think we can find these primary sources? Where are they? Are they even on the internet? And kind of get them thinking about where those might live.
Yeah. So again, just asking them to make that initial guess. Where do you think you might find articles about this topic, or how many? Do you think that there would be resources out there? Julie had shared. Guess how many articles are in the database, right? And you could also do something like, if you're giving a database demonstration and you're going to apply a limiter, you could say something like, if I were to add this limiter to this search, do you think we'll get fewer results or more results? And why do you think that is? Right? And then they would see right away whether their guess was appropriate or not. Right? yeah, you could think, have them, as Aaron, like have them think about what the consequences could be. If you do this, what might be a consequence of something that you're going to be doing? Yeah. 3-2-1 forms. 3 things you already know, 2 things you learned, 1 thing you're wondering about. Mm-hmm. And that would be something too, like you would might want to think about if you're doing something like that, like have them do the 3 things at the beginning, right? What are the 3 things that you know about this before you have the session, so that they are forced to engage in that before you've actually done the instruction. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. So that's one example, right? How can we have our students make predictions about what we're going to be teaching them, or somehow get engaged, even if it's something like, if you're coming in and you're wanting them to teach them how to find peer-reviewed articles, have them do a search in a database and try to find a peer-reviewed article before you've given them any instruction, right? That's the first thing you do. Sit down, find an article on this topic, and tell me why you think it's peer-reviewed, right? They're forced to engage in that before you've told them how to do a search or what peer review is, right? And so you're just kind of engaging them right from the beginning of the instruction and having them be active, and they have to draw on what they already know about how to search, if they've used a database before, what they already understand about peer-reviewed sources are. Yeah, absolutely. Great one, right? If I use this search term, what kinds of resources do you think might be in the results? Absolutely.
I
So
like
it can
that.
be,
I like what Julie said too about that, because sometimes they'll have a topic that has like multiple, like, oh, if you put this name in, that could be the baseball player or it could be this, so
mm-hmm,
when they're searching on a topic that has multiple contexts,
yes.
then sometimes, like they have it like in their mind that it's only like what I see, like this
Mm-hmm,
is my topic. But then you pause and you ask the group, and somebody else says, "Oh," and I don't know why I said baseball, but like,
mm-hmm,
"Oh, it's the whatever," and somebody else says, "Oh, but that could also be this." Well, the
mm-hmm,
person whose topic that is has kind of like tunnel vision
mm-hmm,
because it's their topic, and I'm going to find my stuff on my topic. So
yes.
I like to do that whenever I see a topic, because sometimes I'll ask the faculty member, hey,
Mm-hmm,
can you send me a list of topics or even potential topics? And then getting them thinking about, okay, so I don't use the not term
mm-hmm,
a whole lot, especially with freshmen, but sometimes it's very relevant.
mm-hmm.
So I thanks to Julie for saying that, because it made me think about the times that I've had to do that in classes.
Yeah, yeah, great. Yeah, I think that's a great example. Yeah, what do you think would happen if I did this search? I had a student before who had they were taking a psychology class and they had a really great topic, but the search term that they used was psychology, right? And I'm like, you could say, okay, how many results do you think you might put if you put a term like psychology into this database, right? That you might get quite a few. Um, Yeah, that's a great question, Tessa. And I think, so there's a couple of things. So the question is like, have you had students had resistance to doing a task before instruction, right? Some students seem to be a little bit put off, right? Yeah, about this. So you could specifically talk about, why you're asking them to do this, clarify for them that, depending on what the class or the situation is, like you're not going to be evaluated on this. You're not going to be graded on this. I'm not going to criticize how you did this, but the goal of this is to see what you already know, and to give you a chance to try this on your own, and just really explaining to them why you're doing that and asking them to dive into something first, and that then after that you're going to provide that instruction so they know that they're not going to just be left hanging. Great. All right. So predicting. Anything that you can do to get students engaged in learning in that way and thinking about what they're going to be learning can be really helpful. All right. So quick memory check. Just a couple slides back, we talked about several reasons why asking students to make predictions could be helpful. What is one of the reasons why we said that predicting could be helpful to students? Anyone remember one? Right? Activating prior knowledge. Excellent, right? Emotional investment in the lesson. Excellent, right? Finding gaps in their knowledge. Wonderful. Yep. Preparing them to connect prior knowledge to the lesson. Right. So you guys all got it. So I asked this memory question because, this leads into the next approach or strategy, which is retrieving. Right. So as Lang says here, as simply as possible, if you want someone to remember how to do something or to remember something, you have to give them practice in retrieving that from their memory. Right. So as many times as you can ask someone to recall something that you have taught them, it's going to make them remember it better. Right. So this goes, some folks may be familiar with the retrieval effect, or sometimes called the testing effect. And this is when we think about testing as a means, not just of assessment, but testing as a means of learning, right? There's research out there that the more you're tested on something, the better that you learn it, right? Each time we are required to retrieve something from our knowledge, we are strengthening that pathway between our short-term memory and our long-term memory. So if we can ask students, pause every once in a while and ask students to remember what we just taught them, that's just one small step that's going to help to imprint that a little bit more into their memory and that pathway so that they can remember that later on. So lots of ways that you can do this. And again, some of these will work better, for a credit bearing or multiple course sessions. Some will be work in a one shot. So it kind of just depends on what your situation is. But if you've had students previously, you can just ask them to recall, like, what did we talk about on Monday? Or we mentioned this. Can you tell me what why this happened, or provide an explanation during it? You can do closing questions. During this class, we talked about how to do this. Write down what you remember of everything that we talked about. Again, so they're just forced to remember what they have been learning. If you have a full semester class, you can do something where you have students look at their syllabus and say, okay, what did we learn today that is related to what is on the syllabus and what you were expected to be learning in this course, so they can kind of connect what they've been learning to in the specific class to the bigger picture of what they're supposed to be learning in the course as a whole. Or again, frequent quizzes or reading checks, or just memory checks, pauses in an instruction session to check what students remember about what you just talked about. All right, so that was our second strategy, retrieving. Any questions on retrieving or comments? Okay, so I have another reflection question for you all. So far I've talked about a few different approaches or strategies that Lang recommends. I'm wondering if anything that I'm talking about is sparking any memories for you of other guidance that you've had around teaching, other pedagogical strategies that you've used. Are there activities that you have used in the past that have been that seem to be relevant or related to what we're talking about here? So open it up for a little bit of reflection and discussion. Is this sparking any memories for you of other activities or books or pedagogical strategies that you're familiar with? A KWL, and I'm actually not sure what a KWL is, Dana. I don't know if you feel comfortable providing an explanation.
Yeah, I can talk about it really quick. It's like a K through 12 thing that I'm not sure when we started using them, but you do a chart before you're learning something. You keep the chart going throughout the process of learning it. And so the first column is what you already know. That's the K. The W is what you want to know. And you do those beforehand, and then afterwards you do what you learned. And so you can have students do their own KWL. You can do it communally with the whole class and put it up on a dry erase board, or some presentation like a sticky chart or something like that. So
great. Yeah, I think that absolutely aligns with the kinds of approaches and strategies that Lang is talking about. Anyone else, any activities or strategies that this has been sparking in your memory? Totally fine if not. So the reason I asked that question was to get you all thinking about your existing pedagogical knowledge. And that leads into the next approach or strategy, or the focus area for Lang is connecting. How we can help students make connections between what they are learning and what they already know, right? So it's really important that it's not, what we are teaching just doesn't sort of remain an isolated piece of knowledge out there for our students, but that they're able to connect it in some way to things that they are already familiar with. And so this is, there's research out there that looks at like the distinctions between a novice and an expert in the field. And one of the significant distinctions is that an expert will have so many more connections. So when they learn something, they'll immediately be able to connect it with all of these other things that they learn. And that helps them to be able to remember it, because they can kind of slot it into their existing knowledge that they have of a topic. But if you don't have any existing knowledge of the topic, it's harder to remember something because it's just kind of individual pieces of information out there that aren't connected to anything that you already know. So any strategies that we can use to help students create connections between what we are teaching and what they already know or understand can be really helpful and valuable. One thing I'll mention that Lang really emphasizes is that it's important that students are able to make those connections on themselves, and we can think about our role as instructors as creating conditions or facilitating conditions that would encourage students to be able to make those connections. But we can't make the connections for them and expect them to remember them in the same way as if they made the connection themselves. And also the point that they may make connections that we would not, right? Based on their existing knowledge and, what they've already learned and know, they may be able to make a connection that would be different from what we would do. So how can we create conditions for our learners that would support their ability to connect what they're learning to what they already know? So lots of different ways that you could do this. So one example could be sort of like connection questions or connection notebooks. What are we talking about today that connects to something that you already know how to do, right? How does this that I'm talking about or teaching you today relate to what you've already learned? And you could say something like, citation practices. Students often have trouble understanding citations, or they get frustrated or annoyed by citations. You could talk to students about what are ways in everyday life that we give credit to other people if they've done something helpful for us. And they could talk about, there's a lot of different things that they could do. We send thank you cards, whatever it is that we do, that acknowledging contributions that other people have made is a common everyday practice. And then they can connect academic citation with these common everyday practices that they're already more familiar with. You can also think about how what they're learning connects to their upcoming assignment. So, if a class is coming in for a one-shot session and you've seen the assignment that they have, during the class, you can pause and say, okay, we've just talked about this. Look at your assignment description. How does what we learned just now, how is that going to help you to complete the assignment that you're completing, right? So that they see directly that connection between what you're teaching them and what they're going to be required to do. Other examples, some people like to provide notes or an incomplete set of notes that students have to fill in during a session. That could be helpful. You could have students create concept maps to create a visual representation between concepts. Ask students to provide examples or analogies. How does what we're doing here, as we talked about, how is that similar to something that you do in your everyday life? Or another example is one that Lang calls the minute thesis, where it talks about take two lists and have students create connections between these concepts or these topics or practices. So one of the example that I've given for this is say you're teaching students about the framework concept of scholarship as conversation. You're trying to help them kind of get this idea that scholars are always talking and engaging with each other. You could have scholarship as conversation, and then on the other side, you could have a list that includes citations, and have them say, okay, how do citations connect with scholarship as conversation? And just kind of have them make that connection on their own of what they see as that might look like. All right, so any questions about connecting? Questions or comments? Okay, so the next strategy is focusing on practicing. And this is really important. And I know that this can be really challenging, especially if you are primarily teaching in a one-shot context, that there's not a lot of time. But as much as possible, allowing students to have time to practice what it is that we are trying to teach them and assess. Because we can't, we know that if we see someone do something, we often think, oh, yeah, I can do that. That's easy. But when you actually try to do it yourself, it's a lot more difficult. And so students need that time to actually practice being able to do what we're trying to do. And, that could mean that maybe there's less that I can cover in a one-shot session if I want to make sure that students have adequate time to practice this skill or this task that I'm trying to help them be able to do. But in, thinking really about how we can, as much as possible, incorporate practice time. One thing to think about, and this may be a little bit more relevant if you're teaching a full semester course, or if you're working with an instructor teaching a full semester course, how important it is that practice aligns with what students are going to be assessed on. And one of the things James Lang talks about here is, we often, expect students to demonstrate their knowledge either through writing or through a presentation, but we don't give them a chance to practice writing or giving a presentation during the course itself. And so the assessment is not aligned with the teaching method. Right, so just thinking about how you can incorporate opportunities for students to practice as much as possible during sessions. Oh, love that idea. I missed this in the chat, but describing journals as episodic television to connect to their experience, right? So you're not citing The Walking Dead, you're citing season 4, episode 2. And that's the same as okay, journal issue this, volume number this. I think that's such a fantastic idea. I love that idea. Great way of connecting something that's kind of this weird academic jargon about, journals and volumes and issues with something that students would be much more likely to understand. Great example. All right. So one of the things as you're thinking about practicing assignments, this is really helpful if you can break down tasks. If you're asking students to do something, we know that a lot of cases as we become more experienced at doing something, there's steps that we can skip, right? Or things that we don't think to tell students that they need to do because it's just obvious to us that this is what you would do. But as much as possible, really breaking down your assignments or the activities that you want students to do into small portions so that they can practice those smaller portions leading up to the bigger portions.
Jane, we had a question about practicing. Does it matter if it's independent or instructor-led? Is it just the act of practicing?
I think that both are really important. But yeah, independent practice is great, but also having the instructor there can be, of course, we know, really valuable, because if students are practicing wrong, right, if they're doing something that's going to lead them to not be successful, we don't want to continually that's the way they're practicing the entire time. So having that instructor-led practice can be so valuable, because that allows you to intervene if you see that the type of practicing that they're doing is not going to be successful. But independent practice, I think, can also be very, very valuable as well. I hope that answers that question. So, let's see. So Cindy shared, I saw a presentation about using restaurant reviews as examples of synthesis and gaps in the literature. using the themes from restaurant reviews, compare that to literature reviews, identifying key topics. Yeah, great example. Yeah, there's so many sort of, a lot of our academic practices can seem very impenetrable to an undergraduate student. We use all this language that they're not familiar with, but if you can make a connection in some way to something that they are more familiar with, that can really help to kind of open that, open those practices to a more novice learner. All right, so next up is explaining. And the key point here is that students really benefit from explaining either to the teacher, to the instructor, to themselves, to another student, what they are doing and how they're going about completing a task, right? So as students start to try to self-explain, they can themselves identify that there's something that they don't know. Like, here's how I would do this, but once I get to this point, I'm not sure what to do. So they recognize and identify that there's a gap in their own knowledge. If they're explaining something to you as an instructor, you can hear any kind of misconceptions or misunderstandings that they might have as you say, talk me through how you would evaluate this source. What kinds of things would you look for? What considerations would you make to determine whether or not this was appropriate? And if the first thing out of their mouth is, oh, I would think about this as appropriate as I'm looking at this because I can see that it's a .org source. You might pause there and say, okay, let's talk about whether domain is really an effective way to evaluate a source, right? But you can get that misconception that they might have. Trying to teach or explain something to someone else forces us to be more prepared ourselves and to really make an effort to learn the content. If we know that we're going to be put in a situation where we have to explain something to someone else, we're going to take it seriously because we want to do a good job of that. I don't know how I figured this out, but at some point in my undergraduate career, I stumbled upon recognizing that this is something that really worked for me. So my poor father sat at the dining room table night after night while I explained to him what I was learning in class. He was a very patient man, but I realized that teaching and telling something to someone else was how I learned it. So if you can create that situation for your students and somehow, if it's you that they're explaining it to, if it's their classmate, but being forced to explain out loud can be really beneficial for someone's learning. Yeah, great. Yeah, that's a great point, Robin. Novice learner. That's a term that in the work that I do and a lot of the workshops that I give, I talk a lot about the novice expert gap. And that it's really important to recognize that once we become more expert in something, there are things that we just take for granted and that we understand and do without recognizing why we do them that may be completely baffling to a novice learner. And so one of the things that I think is a great role for us as librarians is thinking about how we can sort of translate for our students the language of experts and the language of into language that they would understand. We understand the language of academic research. We understand what their instructors' expectations are that students may not, and we can translate that for our students and think about that role as our role as instructors in doing that. If you're interested in that, there's a great article by Michelle Simmons called Librarians as Disciplinary Discourse Mediators, talking about this idea of librarians mediating between faculty expectations and student understandings. Really great article. So some different examples of how you can have students explain things, right? Ask them just, why are you doing this? Think aloud. I want you to find a peer-reviewed article in this database. Describe to me each step of this as you are doing this and tell me why you're doing that. Have students work with peers to explain to each other why they're doing things. If you're in a situation where you're working with students a little bit more, you have more time with them, have students create the teaching materials themselves, right? Have them create a slide that explains what a primary source is to other students. Have them create an exam question about something that you're trying to teach them. So having them create the teaching materials themselves can be really helpful. Or thinking about, how you can expand the audience for the student, that, you're not just creating this for me as the librarian or the course instructor, you're actually creating this to teach other students how to do something. That can be really helpful as well for students. But explain their thought process, explain their understanding of something, and why they're doing what they are doing. Oh, thank you for sharing the article link there, Julie. All right, so another quick reflection question for you all. If you feel comfortable, can you share a moment where you were really made to feel that you belonged in higher education? So a moment where you realize something like, I can do this, or any examples of moments where you felt like, hey, I'm actually in the right place by being here in higher education. If you don't feel comfortable, that's totally fine. But yeah, I just wanted to see if anyone had a moment that they were comfortable sharing. Working at the library with librarians. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That feeling of a click when a concept suddenly makes sense. Yes, absolutely. Helping students in research appointments. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I always think of an example myself as an undergraduate student. I remember being in a classroom and an instructor was passing back papers that we had written. And he said out loud to the entire class how much he had enjoyed reading my paper. And it was like, oh my gosh, like I was a first generation college student. Like, am I really supposed to be here? And he like made it clear, like, hey, I can, I felt I could do that after that. He made me feel like this was where that I should be. That was one of I think, a turning point in my life that led me to staying in a higher education for my entire career, because he made it clear to everyone that I had something that was valuable that I was able to contribute in that context. Yeah. Let's see. Instructors invite me to give student presentations or poster presentations. Let yourself be yourself. Let myself sound like a Scottsville redneck, and my friend sounds like Black girl from Memphis. Right? Being yourself, like feeling that I can be myself in this context. I don't have to pretend to be something else. I can just be who I am, and I'm going to be accepted for this. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So belonging is really important. How we can help our students to recognize that they should be here, that they can do what we are asking them to do, right? That they already have knowledge and experience that they can draw on, that will allow them to be successful, and be able to do what we are hoping that they can accomplish, right? As we talked about, right, there can be this sort of impenetrable barrier. And if you come into this and someone starts talking about something that you completely don't understand, and you're looking around and it seems like everyone else knows what's going on and you're the only one that doesn't, that can be so overwhelming, right? And that can seem like, okay, maybe I'm not supposed to be here. And maybe this isn't the place for me, right? So what are the things that we can do in our roles to help our students to feel like they can do this? Not only that they can do it, that they have knowledge and that they have experience that would allow them and support them to be able to do this. Thinking about, and so my friend and former colleague, Amanda Folk, had a really great article that she published a couple of years ago that was really connected to this, where she talks about information literacy as being academic cultural capital. Right. And this idea that some of our students are going to come in much more familiar with the practices of academic research than others. Right. And those students that come in that don't have that familiarity may feel like outsiders. And if there are not efforts that we make to pull them in, then, chances are some may make it on themselves, but some, may pull back if they don't feel like anyone's reaching out a hand to pull them into the community, the academic community that we are in. And information literacy is one of those areas, because the expectations can be so confusing and we use all this terminology. If we're not explaining things to our students, we could be contributing to a feeling that they may have that they don't belong. So a couple of different things that we can do. We can talk about helping our students to recognize the strengths or the experiences that they already have that they could draw on that would allow them to be successful, right? To be really good at this, to do this assignment well, you have to be very persistent. Can you provide an example or share an example of a time that you demonstrated great effort and persistence, so that they recognize that they already have the qualities that are needed to be able to do what we want them to do? Praising their accomplishments. So going back to the example that I shared where the instructors out loud in front of the entire class praised my work, right? That was really important to me. Providing very clear structures and guidelines, and not assuming that all of our students have the same level of understanding of the terms that we are using, coming in with the same level of background, and making sure that our students understand that they can ask for help, and that's totally normal. That's part of the research process, that we all ask for help with our research and with our writing. And then motivating. So how can we motivate our students to really be engaged in what we're doing? And I know that this one especially can seem really challenging if we think about sort of typical one-shot information literacy instruction. Like how much time do we really have to think about how we could motivate our students, or how can we make them want to enjoy doing research or want to enjoy learning about peer-reviewed articles? That can be really, really difficult. But I think the key point that Lang really makes here is just recognizing how emotions impact our actions, and that, for us, emotions are really part of the research process. So what can we do to use our students' emotions to capture their attention? But what can we also do to validate emotions that they may have about research practices or citation practices, right? So just recognizing and understanding that you're not the only one feeling this way, and having a chance to share those emotional reactions that you have can be an important part of the learning process. So what can you do to encourage students to have a sense of wonder or a sense of curiosity? And again, I know that it may not always be as easy if you're talking to students about citation practices, but are there things that you can do to create a sense of curiosity in students? Are there personal stories that you can share with your students? How can you warm up your language when you're talking about students, instead of using, language like you must, you have to, what are ways that we can use more inviting language to allow our students to feel more comfortable in our learning environments? Okay, so that's a really sort of brief but also long overview of the key aspects of the small teaching approach. So I'd love to open it up. I have some examples to share, but wanted to see if you all had any thoughts. What are you doing that you already think aligns with the small teaching approach? Is there something that we've talked about that you're really interested to try? Or if you have any questions, feel free. We'll open it up to a few minutes of discussion.
I'll say that one of the things that I've been doing this really since I used to be a high school teacher, so for 100 years. But one of the things that I know students are reluctant to respond to your questions when you ask them in a large library session, right? They've seen you for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. They're like, we don't know who this person is. I really don't have any clue about the answer to that question she's asking. I don't want to guess because I could be wrong. So I always try to, even if a student gives an answer that's wrong, for example, I always try to like find something about what they said
Mm-hmm.
and like say, well, it's not exactly that, but you're on the right track. Or,
Mm-hmm.
even, and that sounds kind of silly, but I just feel like if telling them they're wrong, but also saying, but you're doing a good job, along
Mm-hmm.
maybe not with those exact words, but just something so that I'm rewarding their bravery. Does that make sense? Like you're
Mm-hmm.
rewarding them for participating. Um, I had a group of high school students that I was actually working with a couple of days ago. They're dual credit, dual enrolled in college, and they were totally, they were kind of quiet for a while, and I asked them I posted a question on the screen and said, so do you think it's response one or response two? And I'm like, so, a couple of them like put their hands up when I'm like, no, no, you own that. It's either one or two. And then for the ones who gave the wrong answer, I asked them, well, why did you pick that?
Mm-hmm.
And there was one little girl, she was very brave. And, she said, well, I thought blah, blah, whatever she thought. And I was like, so that actually could work in this instance. In this case, it's not exactly what you need to do, but if you do this, so I always try to take those moments to
Mm-hmm.
really like give small, tiny places where they can feel success, where they feel like, okay, I can do this.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like if you have a chance to say that out loud in front of everybody, because they were brave enough to respond, I want to help them feel like, good job, even if they're wrong. And I'm not going to say, oh, well, that's wrong, but, I'm not lying to them, but I also
Mm-hmm.
want them to feel
Mm-hmm.
rewarded or like, okay, it's not exactly right and it's okay to be wrong, but I'm on the right track or whatever. So I hope that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so great, and that absolutely aligns with this approach and this idea of belonging, and encouraging our students to take that chance, right? Yeah, yeah. We've all been in a situation where we're like, I don't want to make an answer here, right? And so we understand it and recognize what that feels like. So any kind of praise that we can give our students, that hey, and hey, yeah, it's okay that if you get this wrong, like you talk about a time when, hey, I always get things wrong, myself, I've done this, yeah. So anything that you can do, I absolutely agree to praise the students, to encourage them, to make it feel like there's I appreciate you being here in this classroom, and you have something to contribute to this conversation that we are having. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So great, some comments in the chat, using project planning and active learning worksheets to have its students note what they find. Yep, I think that definitely aligns with what we're talking about. Yeah, having students, yeah, I think that's a great point, Jennifer. Like just allowing students to express their feelings or their thoughts about something. Like you're asking them about Google, but what do you think about these AI results, right? Letting them sort of own their own thoughts or their own understandings about something. Absolutely, I think that's great. Just opening it up and having those kinds of conversations. And yeah, we've heard a lot of stuff about, a lot of students don't really like AI. Some really do. Yeah, it kind of depends. So future plans, in a future lesson, I plan to have students write down the steps for a particular resource, and then we can address gaps after they try that. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Try to ask students why we cite sources before I teach a citation style to get them to think about what they already know about why we cite. Yes, right? How can you help them understand the why is often the most important thing, right? Because if we think about citation styles, those are going to change, right? The format itself is going to change over time. But if students understand why, and or they may have to use a different citation style for a different class, but what we really want them to get is the understanding of why we want them to do that citation. Yeah. Need to do better about memory checks, asking students opinions more. Should professors still require library databases when Google Scholar and AI exist? Yeah, that's a great question. Just getting them a chance to have a talk about those kinds of things. Yeah, Yeah, I love that idea. Teach a nursing class and they have to do their first bibliography, asking them why they want to be a nurse. Yes, that is such a great idea. You're getting their personal story and you're getting them invested. I want to be a nurse because of this. And now they can see like learning how to do research is an important part of being a good nurse. It's connecting to what they're doing. So yeah. So I just wanted to share, we won't have time to get to all of these, but for the rest of the slides, I put a bunch of activities and different types of activities or resources that you could use that could bring in some of these different examples and just kind of everyday day life. So, we had talked about connecting and how students can connect everyday practices and research practices. So I have examples here. One of the things I've loved to do is, like, if you have a lot of students that like sports, athletes are often very good at giving each other credit. Like one player makes a good pass and the other player makes a great shot. The person that makes the shot will point to the person that made the pass as a way of giving credit. And that's an everyday practice that students can immediately connect with citation practices. So tried to give a bunch of examples here and some resources that you can use. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to get to all of this, which I figured we probably wouldn't, but I wanted to make sure that we had, that you all had all of that available to you, if that is helpful. All right. So questions, comments, thoughts that folks would like to share? Key takeaways. Yes, little changes can make a big impact. Absolutely. Yeah, you don't have to totally reinvent your methods. A lot of these things are things, as we talked about, you're probably already doing in one form or the other. So for me, a lot of this is about just being more intentional about doing these things. And like, as someone said in the chat, just you're probably already doing memory checks, but making sure that you're consistently doing them in classes. Absolutely. Well, so I'll put my email in the chat. Thank you all so much for being here today and inviting me. I was so excited to get this invitation. I hope you all found it helpful. And would love to chat more about any of this with anyone. Please feel free to reach out.
Great. Thank you so much, Jane, for your time and for sharing this with us. This has been fabulous. You are getting lots of kudos in the chat. Let me